Okay, so you know one thing's for sure in business, right? It's that you can never predict everything. Like there's always that uncertainty hanging around. But what if, and this is where things get interesting, what if we could actually turn that unpredictability, that volatility, into something that works for us, something that actually makes us stronger?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Most businesses, they're always trying to minimize risk and just stay stable, but that's only part of the picture. What we're going to dig into today is how to build something that goes way beyond that. Something that doesn't just survive the tough times, but actually gets better because of them. And the really exciting thing is we can learn how to do this, how to actually use that uncertainty to our advantage.
And that's what we're doing today, a deep dive into Anti-Fragile, the book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. We're taking you on this journey so you can not only survive the wild ride of business, but actually come out on top.
Exactly. It's about changing your whole way of looking at things.
So there's a lot to cover, and we've got a solid roadmap for this deep dive. We'll be exploring 7 key principles that can actually help you flip the script and make volatility your secret weapon. We'll cover the power of anti-fragility, going way beyond just being resilient.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Then there's optionality, setting yourself up for those surprise wins you never saw coming. And of course, we've got to talk about trial and error, learning from those little stumbles the smart way. And we'll get into via negativa, this idea that less can be more, sometimes way more. And then we'll tackle the barbell strategy. This one's all about finding that balance between rock-solid stability and bold moves.
A powerful combination.
But it doesn't stop there. We're also diving into how even errors can be valuable, seeing how the whole system can benefit, even when individuals might hit a snag. And finally, we'll wrap things up with how to actually thrive on randomness and volatility. Becoming, in a sense, like a fire that actually loves the wind, gets stronger because of it.
It's a pretty big shift in how we usually think about things. But stick with us, and by the end of this, you'll have a clear picture of how to make it work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't worry, we won't just be throwing these big ideas at you. We're going to unpack each one, give you those real-world insights, and make sure you walk away with stuff you can actually put into practice. Think of this as a toolkit, basically, for navigating the unpredictable world of business.
That's a good way to put it. 7 different tools, each one designed to help you make sense of and actually profit from all that uncertainty out there.
All right, so let's jump right into the first one. Anti-fragility. Now, we've all heard about resilience, right? Being able to bounce back after a setback. But anti-fragility, it's like resilience on steroids. It's not just about recovering, it's about actually becoming stronger because of those tough times. Think of your muscles after a hard workout. They're sore, maybe even a little torn, but then they rebuild and they come back stronger than before. That's the essence of anti-fragility.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, something fragile. Like, say, a delicate vase, it just shatters under pressure. Something resilient, like a rock. It might not break, but it doesn't really change either. But something anti-fragile, it actually uses that pressure, that stress, to level up. And that's the mindset we want to bring into business.
Exactly, and the benefits are huge. First off, anti-fragility makes you incredibly adaptable. If your business is constantly exposed to little bits of stress, little changes, it's like a constant workout. It's always being tested and refined, so when those big, unexpected things hit, you're ready.
You've already built up those muscles.
You've been training for it. It also supercharges innovation because those little failures, those bumps in the road, they show you what's not working, and that forces you to get creative, to come up with new solutions, solutions you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. And at the end of the day, it's about survival. Businesses that can learn and grow from disorder, they're built to last.
It's like Darwinian selection, but for businesses.
That's a good way to think about it. The ones that can adapt, they're the ones that thrive.
And the ones that cling to the old ways, to rigidity, they tend to, well, they don't last.
Now, on the flip side, if you don't embrace anti-fragility, if your business is fragile, it's like walking on eggshells all the time. You're super vulnerable to anything unexpected, like the market suddenly shifts, a new competitor pops up, or some global event throws everything off. And that constant fear, it can really hold you back. It can make you afraid to try new things, to take risks, and that eventually leads to stagnation.
You're just not evolving, not keeping up.
And eventually, all those little vulnerabilities, they add up. And that can lead to, well, a collapse.
It's like ignoring a small crack in the foundation. It might seem insignificant at first, but over time, it can bring the whole house down.
Okay, so let's bring this to life with some real-world examples. Think about the US startup scene. It's a bit of a paradox, right? Tons of startups fail, But every single failure, it's like a data point. It tells you what didn't work, why it didn't work, and that knowledge helps other startups avoid those pitfalls. It fuels the whole ecosystem.
It's almost like a collective learning process.
And the system as a whole gets stronger, more innovative. Then there's open source software. Because it's built by a huge community, a bug in one part of the system doesn't take the whole thing down. It actually gets fixed faster because you have so many eyes on it, constantly improving it. And then you've got decentralized businesses like franchises. One franchise might struggle, even close down, but the whole network, it keeps going. And those lessons learned, they get shared, and the whole network benefits.
It's like having a built-in safety net. If one part stumbles, the others can support it and learn from it.
Now, what about those who don't do this? What are some of those big mistakes?
One classic one is over-centralization. Everything runs through one central point. And if that point gets disrupted, the whole system can crumble. No redundancy, no backup plan.
It's like putting all your eggs in one very fragile basket.
Another one is being too afraid of risk. You punish every little error, you stifle experimentation, and what happens? You miss out on those crucial learning moments that drive innovation. You end up stuck in the past.
And then there's over-optimization. Everything's so tightly managed for maximum efficiency, but there's no slack in the system, no room for error. So the slightest disruption can throw the whole thing off. It's like a high-performance engine running without any oil. So the key takeaway here, how can you, as a business leader, start building that anti-fragility? The first thing is to create a culture where people aren't afraid to experiment, where they see those small failures as learning opportunities, not career-ending disasters.
Psychological safety is key. If people are terrified of making mistakes, they'll just stick to the status quo, and that's not how you innovate. That's not how you get ahead.
Another thing is redundancy. Having backup systems in place, so if one part fails, the whole thing doesn't go down. And then there's decentralization, giving different parts of your business more autonomy.
Yeah, that way they can adapt more quickly to local conditions, to changes in the market. They can experiment and innovate without needing permission from the top every time.
And here's something interesting to consider. Sometimes introducing small, controlled stresses can actually make your business stronger. Think of it like a fire drill. It might be a bit disruptive in the moment, but it prepares you for the real thing.
A great example of this is those agile software companies we were talking about earlier. They don't spend years perfecting their product in secret. They release early versions, beta versions, and they get feedback from actual users. Those early bugs, those little issues, they might annoy some users, but they're gold for the company. It helps them refine the product, make it better.
So the initial stress, the negative feedback, it actually leads to a stronger, more robust product in the end.
It's counterintuitive, but it works.
Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about our second principle, optionality. This is all about positioning yourself in a way that lets you benefit from those positive surprises, the unexpected wins, while limiting your exposure to the downside. Think of it like having a menu of different paths you could take instead of being stuck on one rigid track.
Yeah, it's all about choices, about creating choices. When you've got multiple options, multiple potential avenues, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. And if something unexpected happens, you can pivot, you can adjust.
It's like having an insurance policy that not only protects you from loss, but can actually generate some serious gains. And a key concept here is asymmetric upside. It's those situations where your potential gains are way bigger than your potential losses.
Venture capital is a classic example. You might invest in 10 startups and 9 of them fail. But that one that takes off, that becomes the next Google or Amazon, it can make up for all those losses and then some.
So what's in it for you? Well, when you cultivate optionality, you open yourself up to a whole lot more opportunities. Because you're not locked into one rigid plan, you've got that flexibility to jump on those new possibilities as they pop up. And it also drastically reduces your downside risk. You can dip your toes into different ventures without having to bet the whole farm on any one of them.
And that flexibility, it's what makes you adaptable. The world changes fast, and if you can't adapt, you're going to get left behind.
Now, on the other hand, if you lack optionality, you're stuck. You might miss out on huge opportunities because you're too rigid, too set in your ways, and when those negative surprises hit, you don't have the agility to adjust.
And that can lead to stagnation. You're doing the same thing the same way, even when the world around you is changing.
It's a recipe for obsolescence.
So let's see how optionality plays out in the real world. Venture capitalists, they get it. They invest in a bunch of different startups knowing that most will fail. But those few that hit it big, they more than make up for the losses.
It's a portfolio approach. And it's not just VCs. Big companies, they often have multiple research and development projects running. They know most won't pan out, but the ones that do can revolutionize their whole business.
And then you've got strategic partnerships and alliances. It's a way to test the waters, to explore new markets or technologies without making a huge commitment right off the bat.
It's like a low-risk way to keep those options open. Now, where do companies trip up when it comes to optionality? One big mistake is getting too attached to those detailed, long-term strategic plans. You spend all this time creating this 5-year plan, and then the world changes. You're so focused on that plan that you miss all the new opportunities popping up around you.
You become a prisoner of your own plan.
And then there's the classic mistake of putting all your eggs in one basket,
Ugh.
investing everything in one big venture, and if that fails, well, it can be devastating. And then, of course, there's the mistake of ignoring those emerging trends, those new technologies. You're so focused on your current path that you miss the boat entirely.
It's like driving while looking only in the rearview mirror.
Mhm.
You're going to crash eventually.
So how do you build more optionality into your business? Start by thinking small. Instead of one big bet, make a bunch of smaller bets, explore different things at the same time.
This is about diversifying your risk.
And be ready to pivot, scale up what's working, cut your losses on what's not.
Be ruthless about it.
And maybe most importantly, value flexibility. See your business as a portfolio of possibilities, not just one fixed thing.
Think about Amazon. They started as an online bookstore, but they didn't stop there. They kept branching out, adding new categories, new services, from cloud computing to streaming video to groceries. They were constantly creating new options, and that's a big part of why they're so successful today.
They were masters of optionality. Okay, let's move on to our third principle. This one's all about trial and error, or as Taleb calls it, intelligent tinkering. Now, we often try to avoid making mistakes, right? But in a world that's so complex, sometimes the best way to figure things out is to just try things, see what happens, and learn from those little stumbles along the way.
It's like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times, but that's how you figure out how to balance, how to stay upright.
It's all about experimentation, but it's not just random guessing. It's about being smart about it. Run small experiments, get feedback, and learn from both the successes and the failures. Because those failures, they can teach you just as much, if not more, than the successes.
Yeah, they show you the boundaries, the things to avoid, the things that need to be tweaked. It's valuable information.
So what's the upside? Well, when you embrace trial and error, you gain practical knowledge. You see what works in the real world, not just in theory.
It's the difference between reading a book about swimming and actually jumping in the pool.
And sometimes, in the process of experimenting, you stumble upon something completely unexpected. A new solution, a new market, something you never even considered before. And that's where innovation comes from.
It's about being open to those happy accidents.
And perhaps most importantly, it makes you adaptable. You're constantly learning, constantly adjusting, so when the world throws you a curveball, you're ready.
You're nimble, you're quick on your feet.
Now, what about the downsides of avoiding experimentation? Well, you can get stuck doing the same thing, the same way, even when it's not working as well as it could.
You become inefficient, you fall behind.
And ironically, by trying to avoid all mistakes, you might actually end up making bigger mistakes down the line.
Yeah.
Because you haven't built up that experience, that understanding of what can go wrong.
You haven't built up those antibodies to the common business mistakes.
And then there's the cultural aspect. If you create a culture where people are terrified of making mistakes, they're going to be afraid to try new things, to innovate.
You end up with a culture of fear,
Yeah.
and that's toxic for any organization.
All right, so who's doing this well? Think about tech companies. They're constantly running A/B tests, little experiments to see what works best. They test different website designs, different marketing messages, all based on real-time data.
It's about constant iteration, constant improvement.
And then there's the lean startup methodology. It's all about building a minimum viable product, getting it out there, and then iterating based on feedback.
It's like launching a prototype and then letting the market tell you what to do next.
And then you have those skunkworks projects within big companies. Those are those small teams that get to work outside the usual bureaucracy, experiment, and come up with those breakthrough innovations.
It's like giving your best people the freedom to break things, to try crazy ideas.
And now, let's flip it. What are some of those common mistakes when it comes to trial and error? One big one is analysis paralysis. You spend so much time planning and analyzing that you never actually do anything.
You're overthinking it. You're afraid to take that first step.
And then there's the big bang launch. You spend months, years developing this perfect product, and then you release it to the world, and Crickets. No one wants it. You didn't get any feedback along the way, so you missed the mark completely.
It's like writing a whole novel without ever showing it to anyone and then wondering why no one wants to publish it.
And maybe the biggest mistake of all is ignoring customer feedback. Those early users, they can tell you so much. They can save you from making those big, costly mistakes.
They're like your free research and development team.
So how can you cultivate this wisdom of trial and error in your business? First, create that safe space for experimentation. Let people know it's okay to try things, to fail, as long as they learn from it.
Make it clear that failing fast is better than not failing at all.
And then set up those feedback loops. Get that information flowing so you can adjust quickly.
And remember, it's not just about customer feedback. Get feedback from your employees, your partners, everyone involved.
Google's a great example here. They launch tons of different projects, and yeah, a lot of them fail. But the ones that hit it big, like Gmail or Android, those successes more than make up for all the failures. They're not afraid to experiment, and it's a big part of why they're so innovative.
They're not afraid to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks.
Okay, let's move on to our fourth principle, the strength of subtraction, or via negativa. This one's all about recognizing that sometimes the best way to improve things isn't by adding more, but by taking things away.
It's the idea that less can be more, sometimes a lot more.
Think about decluttering your house. You get rid of all that junk, and suddenly everything feels lighter, more spacious, easier to manage, and it's the same in business.
It's about simplifying, about getting rid of all those unnecessary complexities that weigh you down.
So instead of constantly adding new features, new products, new processes, you focus on what you can eliminate.
What's not essential? What's not actually adding value?
And the benefits are huge. When you focus on subtraction, you naturally reduce errors, you've got less to manage, less to go wrong, and it forces you to get really clear about what's truly important, what's at the core of your business.
It's like getting rid of all the noise so you can hear the signal.
Now, on the flip side, if you ignore via negativa and just keep adding more, you end up with a big, complicated mess. Everything's interconnected, so one little problem can cascade and create chaos.
It's like a house of cards. One wrong move, and the whole thing collapses.
And you end up wasting a lot of time and energy on things that don't actually matter.
It's like running on a treadmill. You're putting in a lot of effort, but you're not actually getting anywhere.
So let's look at some examples. Think about Steve Jobs and Apple. Their design philosophy was all about minimalism. Get rid of anything that's not essential, make it clean, simple, intuitive.
And it worked. People loved it.
And then you have zero-based budgeting. Instead of just adding to last year's budget, you start from scratch and justify every single expense. It forces you to get rid of all that unnecessary spending.
It's a great way to keep things lean and efficient.
And then there's the constant process of decluttering and streamlining, getting rid of those redundant steps, those bureaucratic layers that slow everything down.
It's about creating a more agile, more responsive organization.
Now, what about the mistakes? Well, feature creep is a classic one. You keep adding more and more features to your product, but it ends up being bloated and confusing.
No one can figure out how to use it.
And then there are those overly complex organizational structures, too many layers of management, too many people involved in decision-making.
It slows everything down.
And then, of course, there's taking on too much debt. It seems like a good idea at the time, but it can make you incredibly fragile when things get tough.
It's like building your house on a foundation of sand.
So how do you use via negativa in your business? Start by regularly reviewing everything, your products, your processes, your strategies. Ask yourself, what can we eliminate? What can we simplify?
Be ruthless about it.
And don't be afraid to say no to new things, even if they seem shiny and exciting. Sometimes the best move is to just do less.
Think about Southwest Airlines. Their whole business model is built on simplicity. No assigned seating, one type of aircraft, point-to-point flights. They stripped away all the complexity of traditional airlines, and it worked. They're efficient, they're profitable, and they've disrupted the whole industry.
They're a great example of how less can be more. All right, let's dive into our fifth principle. This one might seem a bit counterintuitive, but it's super powerful. It's called the barbell strategy.
And this isn't about finding that middle ground, that comfortable compromise. This is about embracing the extremes.
It's about being super risk-averse in some areas of your business, while simultaneously taking big, bold risks in others. And the key here is to avoid that middle ground, that zone of moderate risk.
Because that middle ground, it often comes with significant downside without the potential for those game-changing wins. It's what Taleb calls the fog of optionality. You think you've got options, but they're not really leading you anywhere good.
So you've got these two extremes, like the weights on a barbell. On one end, you've got those essential things, those things that are crucial for your survival. And on that end, you're playing it safe, you're being super conservative.
You're protecting your downside.
But then on the other end of the barbell, you've got those high risk, high reward ventures, the things that could completely transform your business if they work out. And on that end, you're not afraid to go all in, to take a
It's
chance.
about balancing those two extremes.
So what are the benefits? Well, that conservative end, it protects you from those catastrophic losses. It ensures your survival even when things get really rough. And then that speculative end, it gives you the chance to hit those home runs, to achieve those massive wins that wouldn't be possible with a more cautious approach. And by avoiding that middle ground, you avoid those sneaky hidden risks that can really hurt you without the potential for a big payoff.
You're not just treading water. You're either playing it safe or going for it.
No, what happens when you don't use the barbell strategy? Well, you might find yourself exposed to significant losses, even if you think you're playing it relatively safe. You're taking on too much risk without the potential for a big enough reward.
It's like playing poker with training wheels. You're not going to win big, but you can still lose a lot.
And you might miss out on those big opportunities because you're too risk averse overall. You're playing it so safe that you never give yourself a chance to really break through.
You're stuck in that middle ground, and it's a dangerous place to be.
All right, let's see this in action. Think about those big companies that have a solid, profitable core business. They're generating steady revenue, but they're also setting aside a small percentage of their capital to invest in those high-risk, high-reward startups.
That's the barbell strategy in action. They're protecting their core while simultaneously exploring those potential game changers.
In personal finance, it might look like putting most of your money in safe, low-yield investments, while also having a small chunk dedicated to more speculative things, like those individual stocks or cryptocurrencies.
It's about diversifying your portfolio, but with a specific goal in mind.
And even in product development, you can use the barbell strategy. Focus most of your resources on making incremental improvements to your existing products, while also having a small team dedicated to those radical, innovative projects.
It's like having your steady workhorse and your wild stallion.
Now, where do people go wrong with this? One common mistake is taking on too much debt, even in those seemingly safe areas of their business.
They think they're being conservative, but they're actually increasing their fragility.
Another mistake is being too afraid to invest in those high potential but risky opportunities. They miss out on those big wins because they're too focused on protecting their downside. And then, perhaps the most common mistake is just taking on moderate risk across the board. It's not as safe as they think, and it doesn't offer the potential for those massive gains.
It's like trying to win a marathon by jogging the whole way. You might finish, but you're not going to break any records.
So how do you put the barbell strategy to work for you? First, figure out those core areas of your business where stability is absolutely crucial. And in those areas, play it safe, build up those reserves, invest in those low-risk assets. But then, on the other end, set aside a small portion of your resources for those high-risk, high-reward ventures.
Don't be afraid to swing for the fences.
And remember, avoid that middle ground. It's seductive, but it's often a trap.
Think about a manufacturing company that makes essential components for other businesses. Their core business is solid, but they also want to explore those new technologies that could revolutionize their industry. So they keep a lot of cash on hand, they invest in safe assets, and they also have a small team dedicated to researching those cutting-edge materials and processes. They're protected if things go south, but they're also positioned to take advantage of those big breakthroughs.
That's the barbell strategy in action. All right, let's move on to our sixth principle, which is all about how we can actually learn and grow from our mistakes. This might sound a bit counterintuitive, but it's incredibly powerful. The idea here is that the very anti-fragility of a complex system often comes from allowing those individual components within that system to be fragile, even to fail. It's through those localized failures that the whole system gains knowledge, adapts, and ultimately becomes stronger.
Yeah, think about evolution. Individual organisms die, but the species as a whole evolves and gets better adapted to its environment. It's those individual failures that drive the progress of the whole.
It's the same in business. Those individual errors, those little hiccups, they might be painful in the moment, but they provide crucial feedback to the whole system.
They expose weaknesses, inefficiencies, things that wouldn't be visible otherwise.
So what's in it for you? Well, those small failures can act as early warning signs, preventing those big catastrophic events down the line.
It's like a canary in a coal mine. If you see it drop, you know something's wrong and you can take action.
And those errors, they force you to identify and fix those underlying weaknesses. It's like stress testing your system, finding those vulnerabilities before they become major problems. And most importantly, the lessons you learn from mistakes, they're often the most powerful drivers of innovation.
It's like Thomas Edison said, I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
It's about reframing failure as a learning opportunity. Now, what happens when you try to suppress all errors? You might think you're creating a perfect system, but you're actually making it more fragile.
You're hiding those weaknesses, those vulnerabilities, so they can fester and grow.
And then when something unexpected happens, the whole system can collapse because it hasn't been stress tested, it hasn't adapted.
It's like a tree that's never been exposed to wind. It grows tall and straight, but then the first storm comes along and it snaps.
And then there's the cultural aspect. If you punish people for every mistake, you create a culture of fear. People are afraid to try new things, to speak up when they see a problem.
You end up with a culture of silence, and that's incredibly dangerous.
So let's look at some real-world examples. Think about the startup ecosystem again. Yeah, a lot of startups fail, but those failures provide valuable lessons for everyone else. It's a constant process of learning and adaptation.
It's like a forest fire. It might seem destructive, but it actually clears out the underbrush and allows new growth to flourish.
And then there are financial markets. They go through those periods of volatility and correction, and yeah, people lose money. But those corrections, they often expose those unsustainable practices, those bubbles that need